Join me as I chat with Gabi Coatsworth, an award-winning British-born writer who now calls the United States home. Gabi is a vibrant member of the Connecticut writing community, actively participating in several national writing associations and leading multiple groups for writers both in person and online. Her memoir, Love's Journey Home, published in May of 2022 by Atmosphere Press, is also available as an audiobook narrated by Gabi herself. Her latest work, A Beginner's Guide to Starting Over, was released in April of 2023. Tune in to discover how Gabi's writing journey began and what's next on her literary horizon. This is the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Hello, Gabi, and welcome to the Brewing Fiction Podcast.
Hello there, Keith. It's so nice of you to have me.
It is my pleasure that you were able to take the time and join me today.
I'm sure it'll be great.
I'm looking forward to it. Doing a little bit of research and reading some of your website. It's amazing the history that you've built up with your writing, and I'm very anxious to talk to you about a couple of those things. What we like to do at the start of our podcast, Gabi, is we like to step into Author's Corner, and that just gives you a moment to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are as a writer and as an individual, and then we'll slip into the interview.
Okay. I'm, as you can probably tell from my accent, not born in the United States, although I've lived here for 40 years. I'm British, and I write with a British accent, which I can explain a little later.
Okay.
I started writing the stuff I wanted to write, other than writing for business, about 20 years ago. And I started it for fun, never thinking I would get anything published. And over the years, I have been published, and I've entered things for awards and amazingly won them. So
many awards.
And I've, well, several, yes. Thank you. But one way I managed to get this done was by organizing groups for writers in Connecticut, where I live. And having that network sort of kept my nose to the grindstone, because if I wasn't doing it, why would they do it? So I had to keep writing in order to be able to help other people with their writing. So that's the brief thing.
Okay. So your novels came from a hobby more so than doing it for money?
It's an interesting combination of things. I think I felt that I needed to do something creative.
Right.
And as an artist, I'm dreadful. I can't play an instrument. And so I decided that maybe writing was something that I would be able to do. Although, of course, like many other writers, I felt for a long time that I was just faking it. The old imposter syndrome. And that rears its ugly head every so often, even now. But as I took some classes and I improved, and my teacher kept saying, you must submit. And I started submitting to literary journals. And sometimes you'd get no reply. Sometimes you'd get an instant reply, very rarely. One time I got something published 2.5 years after I had sent it to this literary journal in Philadelphia. But so that was all something that was very encouraging and made me want to keep writing then, because it was wonderful to see that other people were reading what I had written and enjoying it. As you know, writing it can be quite a lonely thing.
It really
and if you
is,
put
yes.
something out into the world, you have no idea whether anybody's ever going to read it. But this way, I was getting people saying, this is good enough for us to put out there for other people. And that's what kept me going, and my interests gradually expanded. And now I do a whole lot of things that are writing related.
All right, let's start by jumping into Fast Five, a little bit of an icebreaker here for us to have a bit of fun. I always start with this one, and in a little bit of correspondence with you and I understand that you're anxious to have an answer for coffee or tea.
Well, I'm English, so of course it has to be tea, and it has to
Of
be
course.
properly made tea. So
Oh
I
dear,
will
you.
confess that
Yeah.
occasionally I will drink coffee if it's not made by an English person. Um, but yeah, so definitely a tea person. It's what keeps me writing.
Right. Okay. So, may I ask what a properly made cup of tea is?
Yes, you have to have water that's boiling, not boiled,
Okay.
because it's the bubbles in the boiling water that help to release the flavor of the tea.
Paperback or ebook?
I read both. I love to read a paperback because I like the feel of the book in my hands, and I like the fact that I can put a bookmark in and see where I am. The thing I love about ebooks is that I can underline things. That's to say, I can highlight things. If
Right.
there's a word I don't understand, I can just hold my finger on it and it will look it up for me, which I love as a feature. And the other thing is, of course, that they're very portable, so that when I travel, unlike my late husband who used to carry, 6 books, 6 hardbacks with him and wonder why there wasn't room in the suitcase.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
so
these days, of course, traveling with 6 books, I speak for our airlines here, you pay through the nose. Just your books take up the little bit of weight you're allowed on the plane. So,
that's exactly it. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
quite right.
Okay. Writing in silence or with background music?
I find it very distracting to write with background noise because I'm the sort of person that starts picking things up that are happening around me. For example, in a coffee shop, I find myself listening to other people's conversations instead of writing. On the other hand, if I'm not writing, I love being in a coffee shop because I'm picking up other people's conversations and I'm perfectly willing to steal them for a dialogue. So,
Gotcha.
so it's a bit of both. But when I'm actually writing, I prefer silence.
I'm the same way. I've tried, even just with my family in the house, TV on in the background, and I'm in another room. And if I can hear it, I'm
Mhm.
nosy, right?
I think the word is interested, Keith. You're interested.
Thank you for that correction. You're right. I'm interested. Pen or keyboard?
Both. So if I'm memoir writing or
Hmm.
personal essay, I prefer a pen because I've noticed that when I'm writing by hand, the fact that I'm doing that means that I'm writing slower than I am when I'm typing. And for some reason, that enables me to remember more. If I'm writing, I was walking down to the station to meet my aunt from the train. Because I'm writing it more slowly, I start to see her and I start to see my path to the station, and I'm much better able to remember the small details that make it more readable. And then I type it into my computer, and I realize that some of it is rubbish, but that's when I can start editing. When I'm writing fiction, I prefer to write on my computer. I'm not a good typist, so I'm not that fast. I'm a sort of four-finger typist, I would say. But
Yes.
I can do that, go back and edit as many times as I want, and that's great. But I don't need to have that sensory feel that I get from writing by hand.
Okay, that's interesting. I remember on a previous podcast, I had one of the writers tell me that they will sometimes write using a pen to enable them to world build, because if they're typing, they don't take enough time to see
Yeah,
details that you're talking about. That's great
makes
advice.
perfect sense.
It
Yeah.
does, yeah. All right. And lastly, are you a plotter or a pantser?
Well, I'm a plantser, I suppose, is because when I get enthused about a new idea and I get a picture of my main characters and I know what their problem is to begin with and I know what the end has to be, I want to start typing. I don't want to sit around planning it all out. Then I do my first draft and I've sort of got to where I thought I would be, or maybe I've derailed myself and I'm somewhere quite different. And I know I've got to do some work on it. So I go back to the beginning and I go, God, I'm going to have to do an outline, right? I'm going to have to write down what the plot is. And I do that. And in fact, in the novel I'm currently working on, I got to the end of the first draft and I went, something missing from this. And a voice in my head went, you need a ghost. You need a cranky Victorian ghost. Now, this meant, redoing the whole darn outline, which is why I had to do it. But it was great fun. So I'm a combination of the two, but I don't believe I've ever started a book with an outline. I know people who do. I wish I were that person.
When I've tried it, I mean, I've only been writing a couple of years, so I'm developing my craft, but I tried with a little bit of outline, and I lost interest in a couple of different stories because I was struggling with an outline. I just stepped away from it.
Have you ever done NaNoWriMo, the
No,
National Novel
I
Writing Month?
learned about it since I started the podcast, actually. So yeah, I have not tried. Have
Well,
you?
yes. And the
Yeah.
idea
Okay.
is that you write a 50,000 word novel in 30 days.
Right.
One of the shorter months, obviously, and for Americans with Thanksgiving in it. So that takes
Hmm.
away days. So
Right.
the point is that both times I tried it, I did it without an outline. And, I got quite a lot of words. I got 50,000 words down, but it was a mess. That was a polite word for it. I think if I'd had an outline, I would have ended up with something much more useful. In fact, those two novels are sitting in my desk drawer here, never to see the light of day. So
So I do a lot of shorter
that's great.
writing.
That's
So
great, though. You have to. I do a mixture of things because I find
do
it
you? Yeah.
uses. Yeah, if I get fed up
Yeah.
with something where it's not working, I'll move to the shorter form, or vice versa.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, there you go. All right. Well, let's slide on into some interview questions here. Your bio on your website, and then doing a little bit of digging into all the different awards that are listed on your website. Congratulations on so much. I was thinking about it. I was like, I just want one.
Well, if you look at the awards, I think you'll notice that they're for different kinds of things. So, one of the first awards I won was for a short story. It was a sort of memoir short story piece. I think one of the next ones was for my own actual memoir, the book. Another one was for my website because I had redone my whole website, and that was the thing you could submit. I did get another award for my novel, but these were from the Connecticut Press Club and the National Press Club and so on. So, and the Indie Author Award. I'm not sure whether I was just lucky or whether people were rather relieved to read something a bit lighter. So the judges gave me extra points. I don't know. But I've been lucky. I've been very lucky. I know that.
I think you're being
Absolutely.
modest, but yeah, it has to be motivating when somebody recognizes your work.
It can briefly to say that I've been writing my second novel, and it's been a bit murky around the middle. And so I sent off a 500 word story to a website that wanted 500 word stories about an object that had meaning for you. And I sent it off and didn't think anything else about it. And I came in first. They were running a contest. I came in first. And this happened last week. And I just needed someone to say they liked my writing. And of course, I got completely re-energized with what I was doing. So it wasn't a huge project. It was a nice story, I will admit. But it was great. Uh, I think sometimes I get a few brownie points because these stories are written from an English point of view, so they're not the same as American childhoods or whatever it might be. They have a different sort of flavor to them, and I think that makes people think they're original. They probably wouldn't win anything in England. So,
Since you're living in the US, do you have an idea of what would be good writing in the UK versus in the US, or are you really only familiar with the US?
no, I think that the idea of what it constitutes good writing is similar in both countries. However, I think what constitutes an interesting story might be different. So my memoir did better over here because I think it had that English point of view. So it was something of a novelty in this market. It wouldn't have been so much of a novelty back in England. And the same with the fiction. I thought about, with my first novel, it takes place in a small imaginary town in Connecticut. And I thought, I wonder if I could or should make this a small imaginary village in England, because those things exist in both countries. But the feel of them is different, in fact. So I stuck with America because I've been here for 40 years, in spite of my accent. So I know it better, you know. And I had to have, just had an American narrator read my American based novel because I am hopeless at the American accents. So,
Published a couple of books and released them as an audiobook, correct?
mhm. Yeah, I recorded the memoir and did not record the novel.
Oh, okay. Your memoir was recorded by you.
Mhm.
Did you produce or did you have a producer?
That's a very good question. So I'm very lucky in that the library in the town next door
Mhm.
is an extraordinary library. They have all kinds of facilities and they include a very, very professional studio. One that's, they tell me, is only rivaled by the library in Chicago and the New York Public Library. So it's
Wow.
state of the art.
Yeah.
And they were looking for someone to record a book because they were doing music, they were doing podcasts, but they hadn't, they're a library. So I said, well, I happen to have this memoir and I'd love to record it. And we came to an agreement and I went to record it there. And I had a wonderful engineer in the studio who was able to say to me every time I thought I'd got away with something, some little stumble, some little mispronunciation of something, he would say, I don't suppose you'd like to just re-record that little bit, would you? And I'd be thinking, no, I wouldn't, but I would do it. And I have to say that the quality that came out of that was really tremendous. I ended up writing an article for Publishers Weekly called No One Wants to Hear You Breathe about the things that you ought to do if you're going to record your own audiobook, because there is quite a lot to it. And luckily I had friends who were voice actors, if you like, who said, this is the throat spray you need. Make sure you've had something to eat beforehand or you'll get stomach noises and so on and so forth, stuff you don't think about. Make sure you've got comfortable shoes in case you're standing for a couple of hours, because standing is better than sitting, and so on. So it was it was helpful to me. And I realized that there were other people doing their own books and that they might find that useful too. So that's why I wrote the article. I've got a link for it somewhere. It's called No One Wants to Hear You Breathe. If you look up my name, you'll find it. So I started, as I said, because I wanted to do something creative.
Mhm.
And I had had early retirement for reasons that appear in the memoir, which were essentially that out of the blue, I inherited my sister's two little boys when she died. And suddenly I had children at home and I just could not run. They were 20 years younger than my children and I couldn't run my business and do that. So I kind of retired, but then I realized I must do something. So I took some lessons, some writing lessons, and I found that really interesting and engaging. And I met other writers, which was terrific. And I decided to keep writing. And then, of course, you get hooked on it and then you've got to write. And I tried all kinds of things. The amount of writing I have done that is nowhere, I printed it out to prove to myself that I'd done it. But honestly, it's never going to see the light of day, or is extremely unlikely to. But I did discover I was getting a bit better and a bit better and a bit better as I went along. So that's when I first started thinking I might do a novel.
We're talking about your memoir and your first fiction novel, and I was curious. They were published just a year apart, but I was wondering which one you started writing first.
I started writing the memoir first. It's based on the journals I kept, not all of them, but some of them, because some of them were very repetitive. I should have gone to the gym today, for example. But my husband died about 10 years ago.
Right.
And I started to second guess myself about whether he had really been the love of my life, what had happened, and so on. And so I started to write that for myself, to
Okay.
explain it to myself, which is a reason many people write essays and memoir pieces.
Right.
So I kept writing. I have a writing critique group, and they were giving me feedback as I went.
Okay.
And at one point, I arrived at the meeting and I said, I can't write anymore. I'm British. I can't do the emotional stuff, stiff upper lip, all of that. And they said, write it as if no one is ever going to read it. And that enabled me to write and to express the feelings that were there.
Okay.
And I think it was a story that people found very relatable for many different reasons. One woman said, oh, I can really relate to not being able to find babysitting for in the 70s or whatever.
Or,
Somebody else said, oh, I can relate to the caregiving part. And that reaction from readers was really wonderful. I, I started the novel while the memoir was out being sort of turned down, rejected by publishers.
right. Okay.
I had plenty of time to start writing the novel, and COVID had happened.
Yes.
So suddenly we were all at home with not much to do. There were no outside distractions.
I noticed one of your blog posts. You did an article. It was called Corona Karma, and
Yeah.
at that point, well, so I read it yesterday, and you shared information about how writers could possibly traverse through the unknown because really nobody knew what was happening, and we're all locked down. But some of the advice you give in that is still relevant today, whether you're locked down because of COVID or just feeling alone. That article is
Yes.
actually quite relevant today.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. I think that the writing is a lonely business, but writing when you can't get out of the house was even more lonely.
Mm.
And it happened that because of my original feelings about writers being lonely, I had started a monthly writers get together.
Yeah.
And we did it at the local Barnes and Noble. They had asked me to think of something, and I came up with that idea. And it was immediately successful. All different kinds of writers, all different stages. And I would explain to people, we don't write, you don't read. We talk about writing. You tell us how you've been doing, your successes. We'll commiserate if you've had some rejections. You can ask questions about various aspects of writing. And it turned out to be very popular. I think I now have 450 people on that mailing list.
Wow.
And I did start it about 7 years ago, so I've had time. And God forbid they should all turn up at the same time. But now it's a hybrid thing. I do it at the library and on Zoom in the same room so that people can join from wherever. And it occurred to me that had we not had Zoom, none of us would ever have learned that we can be in touch face to face with other writers, no matter where they are.
Right.
And so I did write that uh, column, and I hoped it was useful because people get discouraged. Writers get very discouraged. And, you
And
know,
so, is that what you're discussing now? Is that what you're still running as your writing group?
so I run that. I run an open mic once a month where people can come and read, including Keith, on Zoom. So you can do it from Canada.
Okay.
And I also run a weekly write-in. So write-ins was something that was invented during, yeah. And the local library said, would I do it?
Okay.
So I kept doing it.
You're very busy online, it seems.
Yes, online and in person. So people ask me to interview writers for their book launches and so on. I enjoy doing that. So It's fun, and I do various other things in libraries, teach a class occasionally, how to get your memoir started or restarted.
So we talked a little bit about your website. I was intrigued to see how many awards you had, and I was going to start asking you about each one, but I figured that that would take a couple of hours. There's quite a bit there, so I invite our listeners to take a look at your website, and I think you can click into them to find out what they're about. Is that correct?
Yes, I think you can. But one of the things I would say was check your local state or province for their press club,
Okay.
because some of these awards started through the Connecticut Press Club.
Oh, that's great
And
advice.
with 64 different categories, you're bound to find something that you will fit into. And so give it a shot. It's worth it because it doesn't take much. It takes a lot of other people going, oh no, I'll never win, and therefore not entering to give you a chance.
Right.
And I believe there's a website too that lists all the awards that people can submit to.
Yeah.
I will send you a link for that after we finish talking.
Appreciate that.
Mhm.
Awesome. Okay. Everybody has a different measure of success. Do you feel you have been successful thus far in your writing career? I'll start with that.
So for me, the biggest measure of success is meeting people who say, I've read your book and I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah.
To know that I've managed to write something that's touched somebody else is, the biggest reward, really. And it, it's very unlikely that a writer like me will make a fortune out of their books. I know that. So the reader response is what keeps me going, really.
Okay. Nice. And second part to that question, what has been your biggest challenge getting that feedback, feeling that success?
It's tricky to say. I do a lot of local appearances, author fairs, book signings, talks at libraries, and so on.
Yeah.
And that increases my engagement with people, but it tends to be rather local. I also have a mailing list where I send information out to my readers, and I love getting answers from them. So that engages me and them in a conversation that I really enjoy. But it's a challenge to keep posting, things for your newsletter without boring your readers or overwhelming them.
Yeah, for sure.
I was very lucky. A friend of mine is an author also, and I was looking at her social media posts and I sent her a message. Pamela, are you doing your own social media? Because it's really professional, which sounded insulting, of course, but she said, no, she said, it's my daughter. And I said, I don't suppose she'd like to do a bit for me, would you?
Right. Yeah.
And Pamela said, I'll ask her. And I ended up with this wonderful, at that time, intern, but now she has her own company,
Oh, wow.
who helps me get organized with the whole thing. She'll do the graphics, with whatever event it might be. She'll write the posts so well now that I asked her if she wanted to do my next novel. It sounds just like she drafts them and I correct them, and she schedules them. So I don't have to be thinking, have I remembered to post this?
Yes.
Um, and so that was one of the best things that I did.
Okay.
She covers Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, which is an overlooked social medium.
Hmm.
That because LinkedIn will email your followers to say, "Oh, he's just put something up there."
Okay.
So all in all, yes, there's ways to do it, but it can be overwhelming.
It can be. Yeah. I can say I'm comfortable with social media, but it's still overwhelming.
one of the things I've done quite often is to contact other writers and say, how did you do this? How are you promoting your book? Because it seems to be working. And I have never found anyone who said, I'm sorry, I'm not sharing my trade secrets. They're always very willing. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I think as a collective, us writers, we can learn a lot from one another. Your skill is your words that you're putting on pages, but everything else, why wouldn't you want to help? It's not taking from me or you.
No, no, I just think the more the merrier.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Love's Journey Home. You published it in 2022. How did you get the confidence to lay it all out there? It's very personal, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I knew I had to write it for myself. I needed to explain things to myself. And as I was writing it, and this will amuse you. I won in an auction the first 25 pages, a critique from a writer. And I sent her the first 25 pages. And she sent them back with a note saying, I don't really like the main character, which was, of course, me. She thought this was fiction.
Okay.
And I had to admit that, the first draft, I was being a bit obnoxious. But as I wrote the story, I began to hear it as a story. And we all have stories about our life. If someone asks us, how did you become a writer? We have an answer that we're familiar with. And I needed something to encompass my love story with my husband, which had been through several bumps and so on. And so I started writing it and handing it to my critique group because I had nothing else. I wasn't writing any fiction, so I had to give them something to read. And they knew my story because they'd lived through some of it with me,
Right.
but they were still interested and they encouraged me to keep writing and to give it some structure. And as I wrote, the themes sort of came out to me so that I understood them,
Yeah.
which helped. And in the end, they said, you could publish this. People will be interested in this. And I had added dialogue and and they said, it sounds enough like a novel that you can make it interesting enough for people to read. So
Okay. So your notes and your writing wasn't from a diary or anything in your life?
some of it was, some of it was because I had some journals that went back quite a long way.
Okay.
But what I tell people when I'm giving a class is write the thing that you remember the best.
Yeah.
So I did that myself, and I came up with certain scenes that I remember, certain events that happened. And then I also tell people, if you're going to do this, label each file with the year that this happened first. And then when you look at your files, they'll appear in date order.
Right. Right.
So it'll say, 1983, whatever, 1987, this, which makes it a lot easier to handle when you're trying to get it organized.
Yeah, I can hardly remember what happened last month. So how do you remember the timeline of a life's worth of events?
Absolutely. And I always thought I was terrible at dates. But by handwriting it, it started to come back to me. And I checked with other people,
Yeah.
of course, it was, and naturally, nobody's memories were the same as mine. No, it wasn't that restaurant, it was that restaurant. Or you were wearing pink, not green, which gave me confidence
Okay.
because literally everybody in that story had a different point of view. They were standing in a different place in the room and hearing different things. So that's something that people worry about, whether it's entirely correct. But It's not an autobiography. It's a memoir, which means it's my memories of.
Your point of view. Whether it's fiction or not, it's still your right to write it
Yeah,
however you see fit. Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
Great. And then A Beginner's Guide to Starting Over. That is your first fiction novel, correct?
It is. Well, it's the first one that's been published.
Right. Yes. And I believe I read somewhere that you're writing a novel now. Are you doing a second one to this?
I'm doing a second one to this, yes. People liked the first one. Actually, there's a little story behind this. I wrote the first one, and a friend of mine said, "This is wonderful. My agent will love it. Send it to her." So I sent it, and it was,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she sent it out, and a major publisher said, "Yes, I like this, but could she rewrite it with more of the bookshop in it and a stronger main character?" So certainly, if you're going to publish it. So I did all of that. And by the time it was done, that editor had moved to another publisher and was only doing cozy mysteries.
Oh no.
My agent said, "Do you think you could rewrite this as a cozy mystery?" And at that point, I said, not really. So, and one of the reasons, there were reasons why it didn't get published. Somebody else said, "We're publishing something with the same title in 6 months." So it ended up with this title.
Okay.
And I did get it published. I applied to a lot of places, to small publishers. I considered self-publishing,
Right.
but I knew there'd be a huge learning curve doing that.
Hmm.
And I knew it would cost me money to do it because I would have to subcontract things to various people. And so I decided in the end to publish with a hybrid publisher.
Right. Okay.
That is a publisher that you pay to do all the work you would have to do, but they do more than I would be able to do, including distributing it in more places,
Okay.
coming up with a fabulous cover, And I used them for my memoir and my novel.
Okay. So it's like a one-stop shop.
It is, yes.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah. And my experience was so positive that I didn't even bother to try, with my novel. Once I realized it wasn't going to be traditionally published, I just went, okay. And I had enormous control that way.
Okay.
I had all the input I needed into the cover, the formatting, the distribution, all kinds of things, and there was some editing too.
Yeah. Okay. And that was with Atmosphere Press, right?
Yes, atmosphere.
And you'll stay with them for your next novel?
I think I will. I may send it back to my agent and say, "All right, what about now?"
Yeah.
But I may not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair. Good to know. So, staying on the train of publishing, can you give us newbies some advice? You talk about an agent, you talk about a hybrid publisher. I've interviewed people who said, oh, the only way to go is self publish. From your experience.
From my experience, what I would say is have plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D.
Okay.
So start with plan A, which is Penguin is going to publish this and I'm going to be an overnight success.
Right. Yeah.
Then have your backup plan, which is maybe a small publisher would like that. Small independent publishers, in particular with things like fantasy or specialist kind of topics.
Right.
You don't need an agent to write them. So that's another good thing. The third option is something like self-published, but I thought I would look at hybrid publishing before I went to self-publishing, and I was glad that I did.
Okay.
They also published my book in 9 months. unlike traditional publishers who, if you got accepted today, would publish you in 2 years' time. You know, I also heard that 94% or 96% of all books published by the big five publishers in the States sell fewer than 2,000 copies. They
Wow.
make all their money on the huge blockbusters.
Wow. Okay.
So that made me think, okay, well, why not try the smaller ones? Why not do something different?
Okay. Yeah. Great advice. I appreciate that. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your latest work, whether you want to talk about part two of the beginner's guide or if you want to talk about something else you're writing?
Okay, so I've got two things on the go roughly. One is a childhood memoir because people kept asking me as I'm so ancient, what was my childhood like in England?
Right.
And the other one was a sequel or a companion book to the first one.
Right.
Instead of a bookshop, this one takes place in a library. And the new executive director has arrived and been given a house at the end of the drive. And she's brought with her from Philadelphia a portrait of a Victorian gentleman that used to live in the apartment that she had, a loft apartment made from his house.
Hmm.
He's objecting to this because his mission in life is to find the ghost of his wife, who he's lost track of in the afterlife.
Okay.
And he needs the help of a real person to check real records and so on. She doesn't realize, she thinks she's imagining the conversation she's having with him until one day he says something that makes her know this is something she never knew. So how could she becomes convinced that he is in fact real? And he's stuck in his portrait,
Yeah.
but he's desperately trying to get out of it. And I love him because he's very irascible. He's irritable. He can't understand why she's wearing labourer's overalls with rivets in or jeans to you and me. And where she has learned such dreadful language when she is dropping packing cases, she talks like a docker and so on. So it's huge fun to write him. In fact, he may be taking over the book. I'm going to have to be careful. But yeah, it's fun, and people who are reading what I've written so far are loving it. So that I'm really enjoying doing it too.
Nice. How far along are you in that one?
I'm about 2/3 of the way through.
The first draft?
Well, this is the third write because I wrote it without the ghost.
Yeah.
I revised it without the ghost. I suddenly went, this man, George Manchester, has to be in here.
And you just woke up one day and yeah.
Yes, I'm putting him in, and it's hard to do. But I ended up with an electric light bulb moment when a friend of mine was asked, how do you convey the male point of view in your novels? And she said, oh, I always give him his own chapter, alternating chapters. And I suddenly went, that's the way to do it.
Okay.
So, of course, now I've got to write all those alternating chapters.
Those extra chapters, yeah.
Yes, but and take out some stuff that I don't need.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So book 2/3 of the way. So next year. Maybe.
Yes, it should. I'm hoping it will be out next year. Yes, I am.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't know if you have something you'd like to read. You just gave us a very delicious insight into what you're writing right now, but do you have something that you'd like to read from a previous work?
Yes, I could read something from a previous work because that has a ghost in it too.
I'd love to hear it.
And
Yeah.
the reason this one now has a ghost is because I started getting all the feedback saying, we love this guy.
And everybody loves it. Okay.
And when I published it, I discovered that there's a sort of a trend of books that feature benign ghosts, not scary, but just, friendly and or confused. So Mine are always a bit confused. So the first novel opens with a widow. She's been widowed for 3 years. Her wicked landlord, she owns the bookstore, and he's trying to put her out of business and date her online by putting up fake photos of himself. And her friends are telling her it's time she was starting to date again.
Okay.
So reluctantly, she decides to start looking online. And let me start here. Butterflies fluttered in her stomach as she set her glass down next to the computer. She breathed out and relaxed her shoulders to steady herself. These sites weren't just for desperate people. Rational adult women checked them out every day. She was a rational adult, so why did she feel like an anxious teenager? Whenever she watched TV, commercials advertising happily married couples who'd met each other through these websites interrupted the programming. Always the same three couples, of course. There probably weren't any others. She imagined thousands of sad, abandoned women crying into their martinis over affairs that hadn't worked out. She was adult enough to deal with this website. She would only take a peek anyway. She took a deep breath and another generous sip. Shouldn't have attempted both things simultaneously. Coughing and gasping, Molly hit a button. Browse photos. Within seconds, the screen filled with pictures. She scanned them indifferently, half hoping for someone who might appeal to her, half hoping no one would. She knew he couldn't be a man who looked like Simon. That would be too much. So that eliminated men with wavy brown hair tinged with grey at the temples, those with hazel eyes, anyone with great teeth except for that one canine a little longer than the other. She made herself flip through the photos without bothering to read what the men said about themselves. Amazing how many pictures were out of focus or taken in a bathroom mirror. What was that about? She paused and contemplated one man for a moment. He stood on the deck of an impressive yacht and wore a cap that proclaimed him to be the captain. Molly had never met a captain who needed to advertise the fact and was about to pass to the next candidate when a cold breeze ran across the back of her neck. She shrugged and made a note to check the insulation on the back door. "You can't go out with him. He's completely unsuitable," said a voice she knew. Was it coming from behind her? "He's 70 if he's a day." She had conversations with her late husband Simon regularly in her head, yet this was different somehow. Molly turned slowly and froze as the speaker came into focus. Leaning nonchalantly against the island, arms crossed, was her dear departed Simon, large as life. And how he's there to help her find a replacement.
Right.
Who's not quite as good as him, but will do.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm anxious to read that. And I guess with that, I'll ask you, where are your books and your work available?
You can order them anywhere, any bookshop.
Yeah.
And feel free to walk into your library and ask them to get it for you.
Absolutely.
It did win the Indie Author Project Award, which is organized by America's libraries.
Okay.
But I bet a Canadian library could get one too.
I bet they can. I will have to ask that question for sure.
Yeah. And it's available from the big guy that we don't speak about on their Canadian website.
Fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Gabi, it's been a pleasure meeting you, hearing your journey, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
It's been a lovely experience. I'm always a little anxious, but you made it very easy.
Thank you. You know what? I'm not getting any more comfortable doing it. I struggle. I stumble over my words, but at the end, I edit most of that stuff out, and it sounds half decent. So,
well, yeah. So please edit out anything I said that doesn't work.
I'll take that liberty, but there won't be much of that. You were a fun and endearing guest for sure. Good luck.
Thank you very much, and you too.
Thank you.
And if you ever need any suggestions or whatever for your writing, don't hesitate to contact me and I'll be happy to help.
I really appreciate that offer. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Gabi as much as I enjoyed our chat. Be sure to drop by her website, gabicoatsworth.com, to find her work and to find writing tips, contests, and events. Join me next week when South African author Simone Van Wyk drops by to talk about her serene off-grid cabin living, her story of healing revealed in her debut novel It's Okay, and how she prefers exploring darker themes in her writing. All that and so much more on the next episode of the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Click over to brewingfictionpodcast.com to see what else is brewing. Cheers, everyone.